Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. A new week, a new month is here, and so is the latest podcast, delivering all of what the sports world has to offer, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard, and for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And straight out of a weekend where Saturday we had the culmination of a 7th anniversary podcast, and once again, I have to thank all who participated. My two guests, Jai Shields, as well as Erica Fernandez. It was a fun time. It was a bit of a wild time, especially that last half hour as I was trying to give away a couple of items here when it comes to the podcast, and finding those answers for the two trivia questions that I had were almost impossible. But I can understand why, because I have to do a little bit more research on my end, because those answers, which I thought you would have been able to find out on the internet, but for whatever the reason, I couldn't even find them. So I'm going to have to dig deep and put some screenshots for my social media followers and for those who do follow the podcast, obviously on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, of course, the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ. But it was a 5-hour just extravaganza from so many different levels. If you want it, please check it out there on the YouTube channel. And for those who maybe not want to sit through 5 hours, but of course you could play it in the background and get a taste of what the anniversary celebration was all about. And we talked about a bunch of different things, talked about the podcast, of course, talked about what was happening in sports. I know you had a big trade that day in the NFL with Deebo Samuel going to the Commanders, which obviously I'll expound on a little bit later. But it was a fun time, a great time. And once again, many thanks to all who participated, who joined, hopped on for the complete 5 hours, even if it was just for 5 minutes. You know I am sincerely grateful and thankful for all of your support. Now, let me get on to what's happening in the world of sports, and I'll start off with the basketball. Now that we're into March and we're about 6 weeks away from the conclusion of the NBA season, and now that we've gotten about 60 games in the books for a majority of the teams, but the one team that I'm going to zero in on, and I have talked about them here over the last, I would say, month and change. And not to say what I witnessed there Friday night, now I get the stamp of approval from yours truly to think that this is a team that I have to take seriously, because when you have been first in the conference pretty much the whole year, and I can say obviously the whole year because they got off to that great start, won their first 15 games, and have pretty much continued with just success and great play and consistency from top to bottom. The Cleveland Cavaliers, I have to say, as of right this very moment, March 3rd, and early in the morning here, what is it, exactly 9:39 a.m., they are not only a team to be reckoned with, but I think they could arguably be the team that could be an NBA champion when it's all said and done. Now, I'm not proclaiming that they are champions here, because as we all know, we have to wait and see how this is all going to play out once we get to the postseason. Like I mentioned, 6 weeks from about this time, a little bit over that, because that first week, Tuesday through Friday, you're going to have the play-in scenario, and then the playoffs will in earnest begin that Saturday, which off the top of my head, I guess that's what? The 17th, 18th, somewhere around there when we get to the month of April. But this Cavalier team, based on what I've seen here throughout the course of these last few months, and then obviously what we saw there Friday night where the Celtics came out like gangbusters, a 25-3 lead with not even 5 minutes expired in the game. And I knew that that clip was not going to continue. Obviously, the Celtics came out firing, clicking on all cylinders when it comes to hitting the three ball. And when you have a 22-point lead that early, of course, you could think one of two things. You could think this is going to be a blowout and Cleveland's not going to come back, or Cleveland will make that comeback, maybe cut it to within a couple of baskets, maybe even a basket for all that matters. But then the Celtics will pull away, similar to what we saw in Cleveland when the Cavaliers had their last loss, because, and I'll get to that in a minute, where they came all the way back. Now, granted that the Cavaliers did cut that deficit to 10 at the half, but the second half, you got to give credit to their defense. Their defense was swarming. Their defense obviously slowed down whatever the Celtics were able to put forth in that first half. They held them to 42 points in the second half, where the Cavaliers made big shot after big shot and just executed down the stretch. And as much as I could probably get on the Celtics and say, that's a game that you should have won, granted, the lead was big, it was early. It was still, think about it, 7-11 in the first quarter when the Cavaliers called a timeout at 25-3. So we can look at that and say, well, JAYREELZ, come on, they're the Celtics, they're the defending champs. And yes, we could get on them and look at it from a big picture standpoint to think that, is this a loss by the Celtics that will bother them come late May when they meet up, or at least so we think, that they would meet up in a conference final? This isn't going to matter in the grand scheme of things, but I will say this. That was a resounding, even statement win, and if you didn't believe in the Cavaliers before Friday night and certainly throughout the course of that first half, well, you have to believe now. And their record stands at 50-10. They had another win over the weekend to where they are 50 up and 10 down. Now, I don't want to hear, and I'll say this right at this very moment, this may sound like I'm going to throw cold water on them, but if they're going to have a year where they could probably win, let's say, if I do the math, with 22 games to go, they're probably on a pace to win 68 games. So even if they go 18-4 the rest of the way, or even 16-6, 66-16, that is a record that is up there in the annals of great regular season records in the NBA. And I don't want to hear it. If the Cavs have that type of record, and even if they do fall short of, let's say, 66 wins, this team is going to be expected to go to a final. And I understand the Celtics will be in their way, and I get it that defending champs, and they have the pedigree and all the conference finals appearances over the last 6-7 years. I get it. But if you're the Cavaliers, and if you're, whether in that region or a big NBA fan, this team, I'm sorry, this is as good as an opportunity that they're going to have to get to a final, probably more so than ever. And that even goes back to the teams where LeBron was on. And I get it. People are going to say, well, JAYREELZ, you're off your rocker. That was LeBron. Look what they did during those runs, whether it was in the aughts before he left for Miami, and then obviously that 4-year clip where they went to 4 straight finals, and obviously the big one in 2016 by winning. But look at the expectations from this team at this point, knowing that they split the season series with the Celtics. And I get it, when you get to the playoffs, it doesn't mean anything. But having that win the other night in Boston and coming behind that 22-point deficit, that has to count for something. And we know the cast of characters are led by Donovan Mitchell, who had 41 points in the game, and Darius Garland, who did not shoot well, but certainly was effective, and his ball handling and his playmaking capability is very underrated. And I get it. People are going to say, well, JAYREELZ, you haven't watched Darius Garland. Of course I have, but when you think of point guards in the sport, Darius Garland is not going to come to mind. Yes, he will from the standpoint of being on the team that he is. But when you're thinking guys, and I get it, in this day and age, the point guard is now more of a 2-guard or a hybrid guard, as I'm getting ready to knock over my microphone here, my apologies. But for Garland and what he's able to bring to this team, knowing that he's a guy that is going to be overshadowed by his backcourt mate, and understandably so. And of course, we know about their front court where Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen, which I think is a great twin towers, because Mobley obviously gives you versatility, plays defense, gets the rebounds, also scores when he can. And then Jarrett Allen is that guy who's going to be the rim protector, get the dirty rebounds, putbacks, things of that nature. And even their bench is very good with guys like Isaac Okoro, and even Ty Jerome gives you a contribution. Max Strus did nothing in the game, and I know he's a starter, but he's a guy that can light it up at any given moment. And for this Cavalier team, the expectations, I'm sorry, when you have a record of that stature, and considering that you've come out of nowhere this year. Now, Oklahoma City, they're just a game behind them overall in the NBA standings at 49-11. But we've seen Oklahoma City last year get a 1 seed. Where Cleveland, they're a team that, what were they, in the middle of the pack last year? Off the top of my head, who was their first round series? You had Orlando, was it Orlando, Cleveland? I should know this off the top of my head, but they were 4-5 because then they went on to play Boston. This was a team that a lot of people thought they'd make the playoffs. Maybe they'd be close to the top, or at least within striking distance of the Celtics, considering that as big as a year that the Celtics had last year, that they weren't going to duplicate their big regular season that they had, especially when it comes to wins. But for the Cavaliers to now put up these type of numbers, and even if they go 500 the rest of the way, at 11-11, that's still 61 wins. And the expectations are still going to be big because they're going to have the 1 seed. They're going to have the Eastern Conference go through them. And I don't want to hear from anybody that once the playoffs begin, even if they lose a 7-game thriller in 20 overtimes, that fan base and that region is going to be devastated because now I'm sure they believe in Believeland, as well as the NBA fans that think that they believe that they have as good a shot not only just to get to a final, but to win the whole thing. And I think anything short of getting to a finals, and I don't want to hear it, Game 7 in a conference final, if you lose in 100 overtimes, that's still going to be bitter. And yes, it's a good year and so on and so forth, but when you win in upwards of 60, 62, maybe even 66 games, it's not a matter of getting to a Game 7 of a conference final. It's going to the dance and walking out with the hot girl in the process. And that being the Lawrence O'Brien Trophy. So we could dissect it all we want, but all I know is this. The Cavaliers are going to have pressure on them come postseason, whether they like it or not. And they can talk about, well, hey, we still got the big bad Celtics, and if the Bucks make a run, we know their pedigree. Nonsense. To me, not to say the bullseye is going to be squarely on the Cavaliers, but once they get past the conference semis and especially to a conference final, that's where they're going to start to feel the pressure. And how they respond at that point, which to me, deep in my gut, I have to believe it when I see it. But for right now, I got to give them all their props. But as we all know, championships are not won in late February, early March. They're won in June. So I had to start off there with the Cavs. They're rolling, and they are hot as a pistol. And they've now won 10 in a row. Like I said, their last loss was that game in Cleveland to the Celtics. So now they've pretty much come full circle to know that they lost their game at home against the Celtics and then beat them there on Friday night. And then now they are just continuing to steamroll the rest of the NBA. So that's what we have there with the Cavs. Now, I also want to throw out the Lakers too, because if you look at the standings this morning, the Lakers are currently in second place. And if I look back, maybe as early as 2 months ago, so we got to go back to early January, that team was somewhere in the 5, 6, 7 range, maybe more 6, 7 than where they are right now. So they have just been masterful, especially defensively, how their defensive metrics have just skyrocketed to the top of the league. And JJ Redick, you would have to think, considering the job that Kenny Atkinson has done, you would think he'd be the coach of the year when it's all said and done. But JJ Redick has done a stupendous job. There's no other way to cut it. And to think, even with the trade there, Luka Doncic coming over, and although it's been a small sample size, but they've meshed very well. And they've actually played well before Doncic came over in the trade from Dallas to La La Land. But now with Doncic looking to get his feet supplanted there in LA and to now look at the rest of this month and even into April to put themselves in good position, because if they end up being a 2 seed, that means they're going to have at least 2 series in their building to get to a conference final. So if you're LeBron, who over 40, the guy's just been, he's bionic. There's nothing else short of saying that he's an alien from another planet, considering the production and the efficiency level that he's had. And what more can I say about LeBron that hasn't already been bestowed upon you guys and gals, the sports world, etc. So the Lakers, you got to give it up. They have just been phenomenal here. What are they now? 38-21. Now, it's interesting, and I'll get to these standings in a little bit, but despite the fact that they've moved up to where they are in second place, but there is some competition there in that 2, 3, 4 range. And then we'll talk about the rest of the West, because you want to talk about a Royal Rumble here. You're certainly going to get that, at least as of maybe over the course of the next week or so. Beyond, we got to wait and see if there's going to be some separation. But I'll get to the standings there in a little bit. And then the flip side, when you look at what the Suns, and I talked about them on Thursday, and not to regurgitate what I said then as far as them being a team that may not even make it into the postseason. And you know there's going to be changes there in the Valley of the Sun. But last night may have been the coup de grace for the Phoenix Suns, because they had the T-Wolves, who have also stumbled, bumbled, and fumbled this year. But they went into that arena, what is it, the Footprint Center, the formerly, what was it, the U.S. Airways Arena, etc. But to lose 116-98 and for the Suns to just pretty much wilt in the second half. They did not defend, heard a smattering of boos to even where Kevin Durant said that this has been embarrassing. And to think, when you have an all-timer in Durant, when you have a stellar all-star and solid player like Devin Booker, and then Bradley Beal, I get it. Sometimes he floats in and out of these games, but we know about his ability. 28-33 under first-year coach Mike Budenholzer. Who knows? Maybe Budenholzer has lost a little bit of his fastball, considering the sudden exit out of Milwaukee after losing that opening round series to the Heat 2 springs ago. And now for him to not get this team gelled and cohesive, and for the hot start that they got off to, as I mentioned several times over the last God knows how many podcasts, who knows what's going to happen there in Phoenix, because there needs to be a shakeup in the worst way, because this KD, if you want to throw Devin Booker and Bradley Beal experiment, has gone up in smoke. They are 4 games back right now for the final playoff spot, and although they still, I don't think they're going to have a run in them, but you have to wonder about the 10th seeded team. And again, we'll go through the standings in a second, but Phoenix, they have just been awful here and have been just, to me, in my eyes, the biggest disappointment in the NBA. Now, the same can be said for the Sixers, but at least they have excuses. And now we could put to rest Joel Embiid for the rest of the year, as he's going to sit out, rest and rehab that aching and barking knee of his, to where you have to really sit, think, and wonder whether or not the best of Joel Embiid is behind him. That's not to say that he cannot have flashes, or that's not to say that he's going to be a guy that is going to be half of what he once was, being an MVP player 2 years ago. But I even talked about this on the live stream Saturday, to where Embiid, you're going to have to look at this guy as, I hate to say it, a 50 to 60 game a year player, because his body, as much as it's betrayed him and it's broken down, it's not going to withstand the rigors of an 82 game season. So for him to play anywhere near 60, 65, 70 games, I think I have a better shot of getting into the NBA if that's the case. But for Embiid, it's almost as if they're going to have to bring him in slowly but surely next year, ramp up his activities as you get to the All-Star break and beyond, and then maybe play him every other day. You can't play him back-to-back, because the point of having Embiid is to have him play in the postseason. And as we all know, first round notwithstanding, once you get past that first round, you're going to play every other day. And do you think that Embiid at 30, going to be 31 next year, he's going to be able to withstand all of the, not only just scrutiny, but all of the rigors and the battles and the wars of what it takes to play in an NBA playoff series? On top of him, let's just say if he did play 2/3 of the games next year, I don't know if he's going to be able to last through that, because as we all know, it's about winning a title. And the Sixers, as they're currently constituted with Paul George, not the same player that he once was. Tyrese Maxey, I get it, young player on the come up, but they're going to need a lot more than just Paul George, even at his best, and Joel Embiid, if you can even get anything close to an MVP season that he did 2 years ago. I can't see it. It does not compute. The math isn't mathing in Philadelphia. So Embiid, I get it. That's more of a long-term thing because he's shut down now. But I'm saying this on this date at this time, the best, and I mean the best, I'm talking about MVP. I'm not talking about a night that he has 37, 21, and 8 assists, or a stretch where he's going to post anywhere between 30, 12, and 8. Those are fine, and that's great. But what we need to see is that consistently over the course of a season, and to get into a postseason where he's not falling to the court, where he's not hobbling from one end to the other. To me, I don't think you're going to be able to get a guy that's going to be able to run up and down as free and not feel any pain or not feel any pressure. So, and I'm not saying that to pile on Embiid, but do you think it's going to get better when he's 31 years of age? To me, I don't see that. So that's what you have there with Embiid. Now, as far as anything else that's happening in the sport, I know Steph had that big game there on Thursday night where he knocked down 12 threes, scored 56 points in Orlando, but then they followed that up with an embarrassing effort. Now, granted, they scored 119 points, but they lost 126-19 to the aforementioned Sixers and a one Quentin Grimes, who 44 points in the game. I guess they felt no respect for him, but he was able to pile it on and pour it on a Warrior team that has played very well, as you know, especially since they brought Jimmy Butler over from Miami. And I know he's going through his own issues with what's happened there in regards to a condo where he once lived, but that's another story not to get into. But for the Warriors, as they're currently on an East Coast trip, they're playing in Charlotte tonight, and then they come to New York for the next 3 days, as they'll play in the Garden tomorrow, day off on Wednesday, and then Thursday they'll play in Brooklyn. So for those who live in the tri-state area, and if they can get a ticket to go see Steph Curry, I would suggest you do so. So you got that going on. Then you have Domantas Sabonis with the Kings out with a grade 1 hamstring. That's a significant blow to a Sacramento team that's trying to hang on there in the Western Conference as far as that playing scenario goes. So who knows what's going to happen with his status as we move on through the month of March, and when his return is obviously questionable at this point. So for the Kings, that is a ginormous loss, considering that you already traded the Aaron Fox away, and granted they could piece it together and try to see if they could hang on to one of those last 2 spots, especially 9th and 10th there in the West. But when you lose a guy like that who is very versatile, a very good player, scores, defends, well, doesn't defend too well, but he scores, rebounds, and dishes. And when you have a guy who's almost like a mini, or I don't want to say a poor man's, but let's say a mini Nikola Jokic, that's going to be a huge loss for your team, especially as you're trying to fight and battle for a playoff spot. And then we're not going to see Greg Popovich there on the sidelines of San Antonio. I may have mentioned that there on Thursday, but it's official. He's sitting out the rest of the season, considering that Victor Wembanyama is going to be done, as we know, and he's already done with that blood clot in his shoulder. So you won't see Pop there until next year, as the Spurs are certainly fading there in the NBA. In the Western Conference, I should say, in the NBA. Of course they play in the NBA. But now as we go through the conferences, and then of course we'll check the schedule. We know about Cleveland, Boston, tops there, and then you have the Knicks, 2 in a loss, 2.5 behind the Celtics there. So they are still within distance, but they will not get the tiebreaker if they do end up with a tiebreaker at the end of the season, because the Celtics have already beaten them 3 times. So that's something just to keep in mind. Bucks trying to keep the heat, but they're 5 games behind the Knicks. When you think about it, that 4, 5, 6, as I mentioned on Thursday, is going to be interesting, because you have Milwaukee, Indiana, and the Pistons. They're all separated by a game, although the Pistons are 2 in the loss behind the Bucks. But remember, whomever gets that 4 seed will have the opening round with the home court advantage. If you're the Pistons, you want to get that, because it would be nice for a young team trying to get their feet wet when it comes to postseason experience. But right now, they're currently in good position, the Pistons that is, to be a part of that top 6, which means they won't have to worry about the playing scenario. We know from 7 through 10, I mean, really it's 7, 8, and 9 that could flip-flop at any moment. The Heat are a half game ahead of the Magic, where the Magic are 1 game but tied in a loss with the Atlanta Hawks. And then you have the Bulls, who are 4 in the loss. So you only have to worry about the Bulls trying to even threaten Atlanta, Orlando, or Miami. But it is interesting between Miami, Orlando, and Atlanta, because of the 1.5 game difference. You want to be 7-8, as I mentioned before, because if you're in the 7-8 game, and if you lose that game, at least you have a fallback to play against the 9-10. If you become the 9 seed, if you're the Hawks, if the playoffs started today, or if the play-in tournament started today, if you're in that 9-10 game, you lose that game, you're out. So you have to keep that in mind as you move it along. And even though the Sixers are 2 games, or really 1 in the loss and 2 back of the Bulls, it's crazy to think that they're still within an arm's length of making it into the play-in scenario. But you have to include them, and maybe the Brooklyn Nets for that matter, because they are 2 in the loss, but 2.5 behind the Bulls for that last spot. But the Brooklyn Nets are 18 games on the 500. So, I mean, could you imagine the Brooklyn Nets getting into the postseason? Now, they'll be 1 and done, because they'll be on the road against the 9th seeded team, and I would think they'd have no shot to win that game despite them qualifying. And then out west, OKC, they are fine, 10 games ahead in the loss. And as we know, we talked about there with the Lakers, Nuggets losing yesterday to the Celtics in Boston. But for the Nuggets, just a game behind the Lakers, and then the Grizzlies are also a game behind the Lakers as well. And now this is where we have to look at these races, because with them and then the Rockets, so 2 through 5, you're separated by a game and a half. So that's Lakers, Nuggets, both tied there, although the Lakers do have 2 games in hand. So you have to think about that as you move it along. But then you have Memphis and then the Rockets, all separated by a game and a half. And that's the 2 through 5 seeds. And then now this is where it really gets crazy. So the Clippers are currently 6th, 32-28. Warriors 7th, 32-28. And the Warriors have played better despite the loss there the other night in Philadelphia. And then the T-Wolves are 33-29, a game behind both teams. But I guess the Clippers do have the tiebreaker over the Warriors as a right to second, so therefore they're in the 6th spot, which is what you want because you avoid the play-in scenario. But now you also have to throw in Sacramento, 31-28, and Dallas, who are now 10th in the conference at 32-29. So from Clippers, Warriors, Timberwolves, Kings, Mavericks, they're all separated by a half game. So the Mavericks could actually jump to 6 with a win, and depending if the Clippers and Warriors and all those teams lose. So you have, count them, 5 teams that are going to battle for that 6th seed, and you have those 5 teams separated by a half game. So by the time we get to Thursday, maybe that's a little bit too soon, but next Monday, you could literally have a flip-flop of that range where Dallas could be the 6th and the Clippers could be 10th. Now, we know the Suns are behind them, and I won't even include them right now. So you have 2 races, 2 to 5, separated by a game and a half. And then you have 6 through 10, separated by a half game. Where the East, you don't really have that, other than the 7 through 10 scenario, and a little bit between 4, 5, and 6, as you know. So the West is going to have a ton of drama, we would think, and the East will have a little bit, at least based on what we see here so far. And with the schedule, tonight, you have Atlanta, Memphis, I mentioned Golden State, Charlotte. A lot of these other games aren't really. Washington and Miami. Houston and OKC, that's a good game there, NBA TV. And then Sacramento at Dallas, all right. I guess that's for the diehard. Tomorrow, Houston, Indiana, not bad. Milwaukee, Atlanta. Golden State, the Knicks, as we talked about. Philly at Minnesota. I won't even bring up Philly. Cleveland, Chicago. Only because Cleveland. Clippers and Phoenix. Yeah, we got a weak schedule here these next 2 nights. And then Wednesday, Miami at Cleveland. Dallas at Milwaukee. And Milwaukee played at Dallas there on Friday where the Bucks won. Sacramento at Denver. OKC at Memphis. Detroit at LA for the Clippers. Don't really have a lot there. But you're going to watch hoops. It's that time of year where the sports world is still kind of quiet. So you may have a couple of games that you could sink your teeth into. But other than that, if you ask me, not much. All right, I'll stick with the basketball. And let me turn my attention to the college. You had a big win there by Tennessee, hitting a buzzer beater. A 3 where the Volunteers were able to beat Alabama. And as we all know, those teams are both going to make it into the tournament, and now we're just a week away from conference tournaments and 2 weeks away from today where we'll talk about the brackets as Selection Sunday is 2 weeks from yesterday. So we're getting closer, people, for the madness beginning. And we would think a lot of the madness will begin come next Monday with a lot of the conference tournaments and, of course, a lot of those mid-majors and smaller conferences that are one-team bids to punch their ticket into the tournament. So a lot of that will be discussed next Thursday for those teams that make it. And with the conference championships and tournaments, that going to be unfolding as we get into next week. You know I'll be on top of that. But college, right now, it's pretty much going to be what it is right now, unless the team goes on a run that's on the bubble, that's looking to get in. And we'll talk a little bit more about that next week, the teams that are really going to be fighting just to get into the tournament. And who knows if they'll be on the outside looking in when it's all said and done. But the one team I want to highlight here is St. John's. And not because they're pretty much right in my backyard, but they've done something that they haven't done in 40 years. And you kind of wonder if they haven't won a regular season Big East title since the days of Lou Carnesecca when they were ranked number 1 in the nation at one point that year and made it to a Final Four. St. John's, who are currently 7th in the country, do they have what it takes to make it to a Final Four this year and almost be a carbon copy from what we saw there 40 years ago? Now, with Rick Pitino, anything is possible, as we all know. But for a team that is lacking big-time scorers and scoring ability, now you wouldn't have noticed that by what they've done here recently. They put up 89 points on UConn, and then they beat Seton Hall the other day to win the regular season Big East tournament. And when I saw the confetti come down and it was a celebratory mood at the Garden, I thought to myself at first and said, wait a minute, are they actually celebrating this? But then I reeled it in, and they're holding up the Big East regular season trophy. I reeled it in and said, you know what? It has been 40 years. Let them have their moment. And I just left it at that. And based on what I read, because I just saw the highlights, what I read, they didn't cut down the nets, which was good for them, despite the fact that it's been 40 years. You want to cut the nets down when you win the Big East tournament. And even more so, winning a regional final and winning the whole thing. But good for the Johnnies to not do that. I don't know if that was Rick Pitino's deal to tell his team and say, listen, if we win, we're not cutting down any nets, which was the right thing. Celebrating, at first I was like, wait, what? But then I said, you know what? Let them have their moment. That's been a long time coming for that school. And I'm sure somewhere in the heavens above, Coach Carnesecca, who almost lived to be 100, would look down, and maybe did he crack 100? Now, I understand he passed just a few months ago, but I'm sure that was not only a big moment for the school, that's something that they have not seen and had. And I thought maybe they had a regular season title going back to the 99 team on the Mike Jarvis and Eric Barkley and Ron Artest. And I know they won a Big East championship that year. I don't know if that was the last time they won the Big East. If I had to think, that probably was it. I don't think they won another title after that. So kudos to them. Just a remarkable job in year 2 of Rick Pitino. So I have to give it up. Now, do I think they have a Final Four run in them? We understand that they defend like hell. And you know Rick Pitino's all about that full court press, dating back to his days in Providence, to Kentucky, to obviously Louisville, where in Kentucky and Louisville he won championships, and Iona, where I understand a lot of people didn't really see them. Now, they did make it to the tournament last year, but of course didn't have any length. But now we're going to get to see the Red Storm in full bloom here over the course of these next 2 weeks and beyond. So I think the only way they'll get to that Final Four is if they continue that frenetic pace of offensive rebounding, which they're excellent in, and of course with the rebounding and defense that they provide, a lot of energy, a lot of spark. That's what they have there. And even though RJ Lewis is their guy when it comes to scoring, but he is not the traditional guy that's going to light up the score sheet when it comes to him, whether it's shooting from behind the arc or putting up big time numbers when it comes to scoring points. But this is a collective group. This is a team that plays just like that. And with their head coach and with their pace and obviously their style of play, could they get to a Final Four? Now, they're going to have to get some breaks along the way, because you would think they'll probably end up being a 2 seed, maybe as high as a 2. They're not going to get a 1 seed, even if they win the Big East, because we would think the 1 seeds would be Auburn, Duke. You could still maybe even argue Florida for that matter. And I don't know about whether or not Alabama will get in based on this loss here. It's possible. It could happen, but I don't see them as high as a 1 seed. But if they get a 2 seed, maybe even a 3, and if they get one of the number ones in their region knocked out, it's quite possible they could get to a Final Four. But I have to say right now, Sweet 16, yes. I don't think they'll make it to a Final Four as of right this moment. And it's based on everything that I told you. And I have seen St. John's in pockets here. I'm not going to sit here and say I've watched every game or watched every minute, or I've been on top of the Johnnies watching them full time here. But based on what I've seen, and of course, reading and hearing, getting my fingers on the pulse, considering that they play on the other side of the bridge, St. John's have certainly warranted their respect and could be a team that can make a run here, but I think they'll fall short based on what it is I've shared with you. But besides that, I'm sure later on today we'll get the rankings as to, and I think it's pretty much going to be the same overall when you think about it. You know, Auburn is going to be there, Duke, Florida. Houston is a team that could actually be, how can I forget about Houston, as far as getting all the 1 seeds and Cooper Flagg, I know he suffered an eye injury there the other day, but I think he should be fine. They're saying that he had, I guess it was just an eyelid that was scratched there as he tried to make his break for the basket. But you have that going on, and then we have Alabama, St. John's, Michigan State, and the Spartans, who, come to think of it, the Spartans the other day, I don't know if you saw that game, and I didn't talk about that on the podcast there on Thursday. I had a bit of a brain cramp where they had that 3 against Maryland at the buzzer, past half court, wild game there, and the Michigan State Spartans, they're certainly playing on a big level there. We all know about the reputation for Tom Izzo, the coach who's been there forever. Mind you, this is the anniversary this year, 25th anniversary of the Mateen Cleaves Michigan State Spartan Championship. So who knows if that's going to come full circle considering the way they played this year in the Big Ten. But just to keep in mind how Michigan State has performed, 8th in the country, Iowa State, Texas Tech, they round out the top 10. And of course, we'll continue to keep our eyes on what will happen there when it comes to college basketball and the madness that will ensue. All right, people, now let me lace up my skates and let's go through the National Hockey League to see what's the latest and greatest of what's going on there. Now, the trade deadline is Friday, and you've already had a couple of moves that have been made here, so you wonder whether or not a team that has won a Stanley Cup that are looking for reinforcements and another team that is on the cusp of the playoffs and has already made a ton of trades has made another one. So we'll dissect those right now. Starters, the Panthers, who had acquired Seth Jones from the Blackhawks, 12-year vet, been around, very good defenseman, put up big numbers as a guy who's an offensive defenseman and gives them another guy on that back line. Now, they trade away Spencer Knight, who was highly touted as a guy that was going to be the goalie of the future, but they felt they needed some defense, and they did bring a guy who certainly knows his way around the block and has a very good pedigree. Now, let's see how the transition from the Windy City to sunny South Florida will be for Seth Jones, but I thought that was a very good deal, solid deal. Now, with Spencer Knight, I don't know if he was going to pan out. I don't know if he was going to be a guy that was going to have the potential and to pan out as the goaltender of the quote-unquote future. But I would think the Blackhawks may have their goaltender of the now and maybe for the immediate future, so we'll have to wait and see there. But for the Panthers, who now had to put Matthew Tkachuk on the IR with that groin that he suffered during the Four Nations face-off. So we don't know if that's going to be short-term or long-term. That hasn't been announced, so we'll have to wait and see on Tkachuk, as we all know is the heart and soul and even the blood and guts of that Panther team. So we'll have to wait and see on that. And then the Rangers, another trade. We talked about them, whether it was Jacob Trouba, whether it was Capo Caco, and now they traded away Jimmy Vesey, who is a lunch pail guy, and Ryan Lindgren, who was a longtime Ranger and played defense. But considering both of those guys, including Lindgren, was going to be an unrestricted free agent, they figured let's trade those guys away to get something in return. And in the process, they bring back Juuso Parssinen and Calvin DeHaan. Now, DeHaan comes back where he was a former Islander, and he's also been a defenseman who has some experience and knows his way around the league. So the Rangers, who knows if they have another deal in them, as they are 2 points behind a final spot for the wild card. And as we all know, they have both of those spots there where the Columbus Blue Jackets and the Red Wings, who are currently 1 and 2 in that particular order, because the Blue Jackets had a great weekend as they had beaten the Red Wings back-to-back, including the outdoor game there on Saturday in the Horseshoe there, where the Ohio State Buckeyes played their college football game. So the Blue Jackets playing at a very good level, high clip here, as they try to get themselves some traction to put themselves some distance ahead of the Red Wings, who have that second and final spot of the wild card there in the Eastern Conference. But 2 trades made there. Who knows what else is going to happen here over the course of these next few days. And of course, we'll have Thursday to discuss what trades will be made before the Friday deadline. But I will give a quick overview as some teams. Now, listen, players, that is up in the air, because your guess would be as good as mine as to who is going to be on the rumor front, who's going to be out. You would think teams that are out of it, whether it is, I don't know if the Penguins would be ready to unload some players, considering that they're currently, granted it's not a big sizable lead, but they are 8 points from the final playoff spot there in the East. Do they make a move? Do the Sabres unload players? San Jose, the Blackhawks, teams like that? Maybe even Nashville for that matter. What a disappointing season for Nashville. Ugh. But where teams may go to pluck players off of their rosters is going to be fascinating. And these are the teams that I would look at right now if they want to make a push or if they want to solidify themselves, just like Florida's done to have their defense come April of their Stanley Cup champion, and then also for the Rangers who are trying to make a push to get into the postseason. I would think Edmonton, they would have to, when it comes to especially defense, I'm sure they're going to try to do whatever it takes to bring somebody there to see if they could get a run back to a final. I know Winnipeg has played well, but you have to wonder whether or not they want to bring somebody of veteran presence who knows how to win and has won a Stanley Cup. To me, I think that'd be huge for the Jets to get themselves over the hump. Will the Blue Jackets make a deal considering how hot they've been here over the last few weeks? The Devils, now with Jack Hughes, who knows if he's going to be out with an upper body injury? Do they bring in someone that could also add some experience? I know they got Andre Palat, a guy who has won cups in Tampa, but what do they do? What about the Capitals? They've now lost 3 in a row, and Alex Ovechkin's now 10 goals away from Mount Gretzky, so we'll keep that in mind as he approaches single digits, being that close to the great one. Do the Hurricanes, who's already made some deals, as we all know, as they made the deal with Colorado to bring in Rantanen, and there's even been reports that he may be shipped out of Carolina, which would be just mind-boggling to think if Carolina brought him on to be a guy that's going to add some scoring punch to the Hurricanes, now all of a sudden you're going to unload him elsewhere. I understand he's a free agent at the end of the year, but still. And Tampa, who's on a roll here, they've won 8 in a row, and now just 3 points behind the Panthers for second place, and just 4 behind the Toronto Maple Leafs. What do? Do they feel like the team is intact, or maybe do they get another body in there just to add a reinforcement to their team, knowing that if we're this close, we might as well go for it? Then you have maybe Vegas. You wonder whether or not that they'll maybe make a move, or even the Kings for that matter, as they've slipped here a little bit, losing 3 in a row. But we'll see. You still have 4 days to go before you get to Friday, and whatever trades are going to be made between now and Thursday's podcast and anywhere in between, which of course just go to the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ. But you have that to deal with, at least for the hockey fan, as you get into this first week of March. And then you had another goalie score a goal, and it happened to my guy, Ilya Sorokin. Now, he wasn't trying to aim for the net, but considering he was the last player that touched the puck as he was trying to clear the puck there on Saturday versus Nashville, as he tried to get it to a teammate, but the teammate was unable to corral the pass, and it went the length of the ice, past the goal line and into the net. And what do you know, Ilya Sorokin now joins Billy Smith as the 2 Islander goalies to score goals, and he's become the 3rd goalie to score this year, to go along with Alex Nedeljkovic as well as Philip Gustafsson, both of the Penguins and the Minnesota Wild. And I believe it's the first time in NHL history that they've had multiple goalies score goals this year. So what a year for the goaltender, as they've each put up goals here. So Sorokin adds his name to the goalie, and I believe it's only the 17th goalie to score a goal in National Hockey League history. So guess what? It has literally come full circle. Not only for the Islanders standpoint with Billy Smith and Sorokin, but Billy Smith was the first ever goalie to score a goal in an NHL game. And that was a same circumstance to where Billy Smith tried to clear the puck, and this was against the old Colorado Rockies. No, not the Avalanche. The Rockies, and I think this was back in 80-81, if I'm not mistaken, where Smith tried to clear the puck, and the defenseman Rob Ramage was the last player there, and it went over his stick, and as it would have happened, it went into the net. So he was the first ever goalie to score, and him being an Islander in that uniform, now you have Sorokin do it. So there's your full circle moment there, twofold, when it comes to goaltender scoring against the opposition, Now, as far as the standings go, Yeah, I pretty much kind of went through it. Toronto, slimmest of margins there. 4 points separate them between the Leafs and the Lightning in the division, with the Panthers sandwiched in the middle. Caps have lost 3 in a row. Close games, but they have a 10-point lead over Carolina, and Carolina a 2-point lead over the Devils. So they're going to be fine there. And as far as the East goes, it's still going to be the Capitals regardless. Columbus, Red Wings, as I just mentioned, with the sweep of the home and home. Now Columbus at 68, Detroit at 66. And then you have Ottawa, Rangers, Boston, 64 points, just 2 behind the Red Wings. The Canadiens, 63 points, 3 behind the Red Wings. Flyers and Islanders, 62 and 61 points. So you have a bit of a jam there. More so with the 3 teams at the top at 64, Ottawa, New York, Rangers, that is, and Bruins. And then you have the little drips and drab of a drop-off after that. So we'll continue to keep our eyes on that race. And then you have Winnipeg, 8 points over Dallas in the Central, followed by Minnesota, who has also a 6-point lead, or 6 points behind the Stars in the division. Vegas, 78, 4 points over Edmonton, who are 4 points over the LA Kings. And then you have Colorado, who is just 2 points behind Minnesota, that could actually take the 3 seed if they can do so. Then Calgary at 65, 7 points behind the Avalanche, so they should be fine, whomever gets that number 1 wild card spot. And then you have Vancouver, who, although tied with Calgary at the moment, but because Calgary has a win more than Vancouver, that's where they have the number 2 spot by the slimmest of margins. Then you have St. Louis, 64 points, just a point behind both Vancouver and Calgary. And then you have Utah, who are 2 points behind them. After that, it's Anaheim at 59. I'll leave them alone for right this very moment. So you have a close race there in the wild card in both conferences, which is what the NHL wants. And then as far as the schedule here for the early part of the week, tonight you have Carolina at Detroit, Columbus at Tampa, Calgary at Philly, Winnipeg at the Islanders, Jersey at Dallas, Pittsburgh, Colorado. Those are your games there. Oh, that's Tuesday. Why did I get them mixed up? Those are your games tomorrow night. My apologies, people. Tonight you have Islanders Rangers, for what that's worth. Tampa at Florida, in-state rematch. So the big-time rivals there, Sunshine State. So you got 2 rivals going at it there. Battle of New York and the Battle of Florida. Ottawa at Washington. The Ovechkin watch continues. And, yeah, that's all you got there for tonight. And then you have Washington and New York for Wednesday, TNT, your TNT doubleheader, Toronto at Vegas. 2 good games there, and that pretty much does it. St. Louis at LA to play the Kings. Besides that, nothing else to really shake a stick at when it comes to the National Hockey League. All right, now let me get in the batter's box, turn my attention to some baseball real quick, and really the only thing I have to add, besides the Yankees already becoming a mass unit at this very moment. Now, 2 months ago, the family of Pete Rose had signed a petition to get the elder and dearly departed statesman there of a few months ago, Pete Rose, to get him in the Hall. And as it is right now, the commissioner, Rob Manfred, is contemplating that to the point that he'll see, I guess, with his constituents and maybe with parts of the Veterans Committee with the Hall of Fame, not to say that they would vote him in, but I'm sure this is going to be a collective effort, which is going to fall on the commissioner, considering many moons ago, Pete Rose had signed his name on the ineligible list due to his gambling in the mid-'80s as the manager of the Cincinnati Reds. But for Manfred now to do this, and I get it that this has pretty much been brought on the Rose family, so I can't get on Manfred to say, oh, now all of a sudden you're going to do this posthumously after Rose died in September. No, this has more been the family of Pete Rose to venture forth to say, this is what we have here as far as petitions that have been filed to get our dad enshrined in Cooperstown. And then you also had the news there on Saturday where the current president came out and is pardoning Pete Rose, but nobody wants to hear from him, and nobody wants to read his tweet or care. When I saw that, I said, just get out of the way, just go away completely. And that's just for this matter alone, so I don't want people to think right away, oh, well, here we go, JAYREELZ, is he one of those crazy liberal lefts? I am not. I think I've gone on record here on this podcast to say, whether you want to believe it or not, but you can fight me off all you want. I am right down the middle. My politics aren't left, they're not right, they're right down the middle. I'm for what's right, bottom line. So, listen, how I feel about these politicians, etc., delivering on what they should do, we understand that they really don't fulfill a lot of that stuff. And that goes across everybody, whether it's independent, Republican, Democrat, etc. So for those who are going to think that, oh, well, we know where JAYREELZ leans, not this guy. And I even talked about that on the live stream. If you want to get a little bit more detailed, go back to the live stream and see for yourself. So, but he just needs to stick his nose out of it and stick to whatever it is that he's trying to do and try to make things right instead of just upend everything. And well, anyway, let me just stop there. But if the Rose family has come out now, then let's see what Manfred's going to do. Now, we know Pete Rose is a Hall of Famer. There's no argument about that. And who knows if he's the guy that's going to be the last line of defense, which I would think. I'm sure he's going to have to bring it up, like I mentioned, to certain people or certain groups to see whether or not that this is going to be okay by them. But if Rose is going to get his day, not this year, because, who knows, maybe it could be this year, as early as that, but we'll have to wait and see. But that's a story that, I will continue to monitor. And then the Yankees, these injuries. You had Luis Gil, the reigning Rookie of the Year in the American League, had to be shut down because of shoulder discomfort. Now, there's supposed to be an MRI. I don't know what the prognosis is, if it just needs rest, if it's a situation where they're going to have surgery. Way too early right now. I don't have all the details, but if that's going to be the case, that's a big loss. And I'm sure, not to say he's wishing on this, but I would think deep down inside, maybe privately, for one Marcus Stroman to think like, well, hey, I don't want him to go down, but if he goes down, then I'm not going anywhere. So Stroman, as you heard a couple of weeks ago, said that he's a starter. He's not going to come out of the bullpen. He's not going to spot start, any of that. And with the deep rotation that they currently have, maybe with Gil out, that will cement Stroman in the rotation. So we'll have to wait and see what's going to happen there with the MRI. You already have Giancarlo Stanton that's on the IL due to elbow inflammation. So we'll have to wait and see what's going to happen with him, as he will start on the shelf where the Yankees will begin their season at home against the Brewers. And then you also have DJ LeMahieu who's trying to work his way back in the lineup. He had to leave the game because of a calf injury. And we know that DJ LeMahieu has just faced a plethora of injuries over the last couple of years. And at 36 years of age and 2 years still on the contract, who knows? Is it going to be a thing where he's going to start? Not necessarily because of this injury, but will he start on the IL? Is it a scenario where they may have to cut bait when it's all said and done, because he's a guy that he may not remain or stay healthy. And as we've seen, even when he is healthy, he is a far cry from the player that he was in 2019 and 2020 when he won a batting title and was actually in the top 3 in the MVP vote for the American League. So let's see what's going to happen there. But the Yankees certainly not off to a good start there when it comes to health. And let's see how that plays out here throughout the course of the spring. Now, as I put on my helmet and shoulder pads, there's a couple of quick news and notes with the NFL. Now, the salary cap has been raised up to $279.2 million per team. That's going to be good for those who are looking to get under or already under the cap. So you got another, 20-some-odd million that has been raised up. And I'm sure that money's going to be needed for Deebo Samuel. Because Samuel on Saturday was traded from the Niners to the Commanders for a 5th-round pick. And I would think he's going to get a handsome payday at some point. I don't know if it's going to be this coming season. I don't know what his status is as far as maybe he is about to be, whether unrestricted or a restricted free agent. But for Samuel, as we all know, he is a Swiss Army knife. He's a guy that is super versatile. Not a wideout per se in the classic sense, but he can play out wide. We know he can play in the slot. He can play in the backfield. He is really a jack of all trades. But here's the thing. It's a high risk, high reward because as productive as Samuel is and as tough as nails as he is, but A, he can't remain healthy. B, he's going to want a big payday. And are you willing to fork over big bucks to keep this guy in Washington for, let's say, a 4 or 5 year period? Now, we went through this in the chat room on the live stream when the question was posed, is he a top 10 wide receiver? In my eyes, he is not. And not that I'm going to break down all 10, but we understand how good he is and how big of a role he plays in an offensive scheme. And I'm sure Cliff Kingsbury, the offensive coordinator, I'm sure he has been up all night trying to draft various plays just for Deebo Samuel. But again, he gets nicked up a lot. He gets hurt. And if you're going to give him an upwards of whatever the guaranteed money may be, that could be tough because if he's not going to be in the lineup more than you would hope for as a Commander franchise, then that's where you're going to feel the sting. So something to keep in mind as we move it along. Samuel, very good player, top 10 player. He is not, but you will give up a 5th rounder in a heartbeat to bring in a talent like Samuel, and that's what the Commanders did, and that's a great target for Jaden Daniels, another weapon to go along with Terry McLaurin, and Zach Ertz. You have to give it up for what they've done to try to bring a player who knows his way around winning. Now, he hasn't won a Super Bowl, but he's been to 2 Super Bowls and at least has that gene to kind of show the guys that this is how you do and this is how you conduct yourself in order to get to a Super Bowl and to get to the big dance. Now, winning it, separate issue, but I think that was a big pickup despite the fact that he is a high-risk, high-reward guy based on the things that I mentioned. And then Matthew Stafford stays in LA. He agrees to restructure his deal, which I thought, with all the reports about him wanting $50 million, and we don't know what the terms of the contract were, but I just found it fascinating based on what his wife had said and a lot of the rumblings that you heard that he wanted out of LA. Why would he want out of LA? Where the weather is perfect, it's beautiful. He's on a team that was this close from going to an NFC Championship game. He's already won a Super Bowl. The coach-quarterback combo is as solid and as good in the league as any other. And for him to stay, deal restructured, etc. So I'm glad that that's the case. You don't have to worry about him going elsewhere with all these rumors, whether it's the Giants, Pittsburgh, etc. And who knows if he got his $50 million. I would think that his request certainly probably was honored. So the Stafford family does stay in LA, and that's good for them. And then the Giants, I read this, they're considering Aaron Rodgers as their quarterback. It's almost as if they're being the Mets, where the Jets are the Yankees, and it's usually the other way around. Why would the Giants, and I understand they need a quarterback, would even flirt with the idea of Aaron Rodgers? I get it. 2 years in New York, knows his way around the media. But again, you're going to have a guy that's going to hog up the headlines, that's going to suck all the oxygen out of the room, unless he's at a point in his career knowing that even with this Giant team, they're not ready to win. So why even bring him on? To me, it makes no sense. But the Giants, they're looking to possibly bring in Aaron Rodgers as their quarterback. And then Myles Garrett is not open to getting an extension by the Cleveland Browns. The Browns are saying that they don't want to trade their star pass rusher and former defensive player of the year. Now, it's interesting because the number 2 pick overall is owned by the Browns, and there are rumors that if you had a mock draft, the pass rusher out of Penn State, Abdul Carter, could be that guy. Now, with their quarterback scenario, Deshaun Watson, who's still owed a ton of money over the next 2 years, but if you have a guy that's up there, whether it's Shedeur Sanders sitting there at 2, do you take him? And who knows if he goes to Cleveland, considering that I'm sure it's one of the last few places that Shedeur Sanders wants to play in. But again, let's see what's going to happen here. But they have that flexibility because let's just say, for argument's sake, Garrett's not going to sign, and now you're heading into the week or 2 before the draft, and then you trade Garrett, and you could still draft Carter, or even better yet, maybe if the Giants are in love with Shedeur Sanders, if Cam Ward is expected to go number 1 to Tennessee, then you could flip-flop. You'll still have your guy there at 3 if it's Carter, so you could bring your pass rusher on. You could say goodbye to Myles Garrett and pretty much start anew without having to deal with Garrett, his attitude, etc., or on top of that, to have to deal with the money that I don't believe he has any guaranteed money left, but with the extension that although Garrett has passed up on, maybe you wash your hands and move on knowing that there is a pass rusher there from Penn State at number 2. A lot of intriguing aspects, but that's what you have there with the NFL. And then lastly, you had a lightweight fight on Saturday night at the Barclays, and the only reason why I'm bringing this up is because of the result. Now you had Gervonta Davis, a.k.a. Tank Davis, go up against Lamont Roach Jr., and in the fight in the 9th round, where Roach actually did a very good job, and a lot of respect said by Tank Davis to Lamont Roach, where he certainly had nothing but glowing praises to talk about his opponent. But in the 9th round, now it certainly looked innocent. It didn't look like there was anything alarming or eyebrow raising, where after a bit of a grapple and as they disbanded, there was a second where Tank Davis then looked like he would not to say he's out of sorts, but was just trying to realize what was going on there in that moment, to where he got on one knee, went to his corner, and had his cutman or his trainer just rub his head to where it seemed like he just needed to either get a refresher or who knows. But because he was rubbing his head in the post-match press conference, Tank Davis said that he had something in his eye based on him getting his hair done a couple days prior when he got it braided, and I guess some grease where it was applied to his hair got in his eye, so therefore he took a knee. Now, obviously, this isn't the NFL, so it's not as if he was taking a knee, going in the locker room and calling it a game, or taking a knee in the end zone on a touchback. I'm sure he knows the rules, but because the rule states that if you go down on one knee, that you're declaring yourself being knocked down. And when you look at what the judges had come up with, considering that it was a draw, and for Roach to actually, if that would have been considered a knockdown, he would have been the guy to win the WBA lightweight championship. But as it is right this very moment, that isn't the case. Now, you would think there's going to be a rematch. Roach, like I said, was just very complimentary by Tank Davis in the post-match. And there has to be another fight to be had here. We want to see whether or not Roach can come back and maybe even win this bout. But sadly, boxing, as it is in 2025, as it was in 2015, 1995, 1975, and so on, it is just crooked. How can the judges overlook that? If the fighter goes down, and I don't know if there was a pool reporter for have any of those judges explain what was happening, but as we all know, the rule is the rule. If you go down on one knee, that's it. It's considered a knockdown, as the referee is supposed to start doing his 10 count. But I'm sure a rematch will probably be in the works. Not a good look on the judges. Not a good look for boxing there on Saturday night at the Barclays Center, just on the over the other side of the bridge. But for boxing and for what we've witnessed here over the decades of the sport, can you say you're surprised? Can you look at that and say, wow, I'm shocked? You can be shocked by the outcome, of course, but shocked from the standpoint of, oh my God, he got robbed. Or, oh, did you see what had happened here? Where, I mean, it's just so convoluted. And unfortunately, the sport is, as I've said a million times, it's literally dying right in front of our eyes. And is it going to get any better? Is it going to get any better at some point in the not too distant future? I have to say, it is not. That'll do it, my good people. Another episode just about the books, as always. Thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the wonderful world of sports. If you haven't done so, please subscribe, rate, review, throw me a few stars, write a review, Apple, Spotify, the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ. Please, people, I'm looking to increase the visibility of this podcast with all the others that are out there. So if you could do that, and I also have another live stream that I believe the weekly live stream train is now in the tracks, and it will come into the station there Wednesday high noon, and I'll keep you abreast of the times as we move it along, but I'll be back on the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ, so please subscribe there. And for more content, go to the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ, my 1 minute shorts on whatever's happening in the world of sports. Obviously, the podcast twice a week, as well as the live stream now you'll see once a week, every Wednesday, high noon, moving forward until there may be a pivot, more so in time, maybe with the day two. Well, that's where you have to keep your fingers on the dial there to make sure that you get all the information, to subscribe, get the bell rung to notify you of a post of what's going on with yours truly, with the podcast, etc. So please, if you could do that, I would sincerely and gratefully appreciate it. And if you haven't done so, please subscribe to my social media at Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, JAYREELZ1, just a number, the old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. From every fiber of my being, from the top of my head to the tip of my toes and everything in between, talking sports since birth. I'm built for this. I was born to do this and been doing it now officially for over 7 years on this podcast. Over almost 2 years. Next month will be actually 3 years. Next month will be 3 years. I've been doing it twice a week, and over a year doing it full time, trying to make this my passive income to generate, which I haven't really done, people. So that's why I need your help to go out there and subscribe and to share it with your family, friends, foes, frenemies, whomever it may be. Share it on social media, etc. And I'll make sure that once you tag me, I'll post it out there. Because as long as I'm sitting in front of this microphone and this camera, I promise I will deliver nothing but passion, fire, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. Sorry for the construction again, people. Not my doing, my apologies. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Center, the South Pacific, and all points beyond. Peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.